So over on the NA version of the game, we're still going through the cycling raid up for the Thanksgiving banner, and after Skahawk, we have Reines going on a raid up, and this is probably the most valuable servant that's going on a raid up, just because she has the same ability after her buff as Waver to give one ally 50% of their total NP gauge, and that's pretty useful considering that both Skadi and Koyenskaya are godly supports, mainly because they do give 50% battery to one ally. It's an insanely powerful support type ability to have, and after her buff, Reines is going to be able to compete and do the same thing, and she's kind of a general defensive support as well. That gives a decent attack buff, but that doesn't come till next year, so you're kind of in this predicament where, do you want to summon for Reines now so you have her, so when she gets her buff, you don't have to worry about summoning for her? Now, you may be saying, well, she gets a raid up when she gets her buff, so why do I need to bother about pulling her now? And that's the timing for next year. Not only is next year chocked full of a lot of different servants that are all pretty top tier, Reines in particular is very close to Castoria's banner, and as you guys know, Castoria's been reigning for about the last 2 years uncontested on the JP version of the game. So summoning for Reines, or at least pushing it off, is almost decreasing your chances of being able to get Castoria, and that's something you really don't want to do, because I'll tell you straight up right now, if you have to pick between summoning for Reines or summoning for Castoria, I'm going to tell you 100 days out of the week to summon for Castoria over Reines. So that's why you're going to be in a little bit of predicament right now as to whether or not you want to summon for her right now. It just kind of depends on what your box is looking at and whether or not you're really going to value going for Reines. Obviously, she's a very valuable servant, but if you already have Skadi, or you're planning on going absolute ham taro for Castoria, you can avoid getting her, but she does allow certain team comps, especially if you want to utilize people like Chen Dinglenuts. Having all of the possible NP to give to somebody is very useful, and as we'll talk about in this video, she's very, very good for harder content. So just keep all of that in mind as we go into this video. You're going to be in quite the dilemma, because she is quite a good servant. Now, before we begin, if you have not already, what are you guys doing? Click that like and that subscribe button to help your boy out. He's on the road to 100k, and we're actually closing in on 12k. Might have actually hit 12k by the time this video drops, which should be like the day before Reines goes on raid up. And so we're slowly inching to that 100k, alright? So help your boy out on that. If you want more content, you can click that join button to become a channel member. You can go to the Twitch, which is linked down in the description down below, and, catch all the streams that are on every single weekday. Although, your boy is a college student. We are at the very end of semester, so I'm a little bit busy. So if I miss a day or two, that's why. Also, I've been forgetting to mention this for newer people, but I am affiliated with Lootcakes. I have my link down in the description down below. It's basically a service that you sign up and you get money back for all of your purchases in any of the gacha games. But I'm specifically doing mine for FGO because this is an FGO channel. Like, I felt like that just made the most sense. Not going to be like, okay, so my loot case is going to be like Dokkan Battle when I don't talk about Dokkan Battle at all. But it's completely free to sign up for. And basically, every time you make a purchase, you earn points to getting different gift cards and whatnot. So I just think it's like a perfect thing to kind of be affiliated with, because it's like, oh yeah, I'm spending money on gacha games and I'm always earning a little bit back every time, and the more people we get in our group, the more we all collectively earn back. So I think it's a really cool system, and I'm probably going to start mentioning it a bit more here and there, just because it's actually a service that I really believe in, and I think it's just generally good for anybody that's going to be playing this gacha game, just to kind of give us, the consumers, a bit more of an edge on the overlord that is DW. Now, with all that being said, let's go ahead and just start talking about Reines and how good she is, starting off with her hits. Although the hits really don't matter all that much, because Reines is a support type servant, you're really not going to be doing very many Brave Chains with her. The most important thing is that she has really strong arts cards, 2 of them in fact with 4 hits each with 0.64% NP generation, which means even without crits you will get decent NP back, but obviously with all arts cards, as long as you're getting crits on them, you will be getting massive NP refund back. But also do keep in mind that these are passively being buffed by 8% because of her territory creation, as well as her quick cards getting an 8% buff as well. And those quick cards, with that buff, aren't too shabby. They're packing 1 less hit at 3, but you still got 2 of them with 8.9% star gen. And because she's a rider, whether you think this is good or not, she actually will absorb a lot of those stars to herself because of her really high natural star weight. So getting crits on those arts cards to get her NP actually isn't all that far-fetched. And she should be able to front a decent bit of stars for you. Like, I'm not saying she's going to be Jack or anything, but a few stars here and there to kind of help out the overall star genning process shouldn't be that much of a problem for her. And then she's also packing the almighty omnipotent extra attack with 5 hits, which you guys know that we like to see around here. Unfortunately, her NP charge and star gen stats aren't quite good enough to make that extra attack pop off, because unlike the other card types, the extra attack cannot crit. So it's very, very reliant on your natural star weight and NP generation stats being very, very high. So it's kind of just going to be hitting normal, I guess. It's not going to be hitting different. It's just going to be kind of a normal big 5-hit card. And again, you're probably not going to see it very much anyway, because who is brave chaining with Reines? Like, if you're brave chaining with Reines, I think you might be doing something a little off. But let's go ahead and talk about her skills, because those are way more important than her hits and anything else, because the skills and NP are what make the support type servant. So starting off with skill 1, you essentially just have Waver skill just a little bit worse, because it's not A+, it's A. So you're getting a 25% buff to the party's defense for 3 turns, 400 damage cut to the entire party for 3 turns, and then you're giving everybody 10% NP, all on a 6-turn cooldown, which, again, you'll kind of notice with Reines is that she's more of a defensive support, which is why I'm kind of surprised they neutered this skill a little bit. I get that she's, you know, Waver's apprentice, so maybe she doesn't have the better skill. Like, maybe hers is, like, not on par with his at A+, but it seems a little weird. Still a good skill, though, because it makes you pretty tanky for 3 turns. The defense plus the damage cut does make you pretty thick. It's actually why, even during the Merlin era, I would still take 1 Merlin, 1 Waver, because I really valued having that extra defensive support and not just getting absolutely obliterated in 1 or 2 hits by the bosses. It makes you really tanky, especially with Merlin's ability to kind of refund your HP. So I do think Reines is very valuable in bringing a lot of chunky defense to your party, whereas her second skill is really supposed to make that main DPS that you're buffing hit pretty hard, because not only is she giving them a 20% battery, she's also giving them a pretty chunky 40% attack buff for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. Now, this does reduce her own attack by 20% for 3 turns, but literally, who actually cares? Like, if your support is lowering their own offensive output, that's literally not a demerit at all whatsoever. Because unless you're that one dude who I'm sure I'll get in the comments down below, who maybe lost the fight because their Reines didn't do just like 300 more damage or something, or they're the one guy that's using DPS Reines, nobody else cares. That's like the 0.001% of the entire FGO fan base. For everyone else, using Reines is kind of like a normal support and not using her for the memes, I mean, you're going to be absolutely fine and not notice this at all whatsoever. But the good thing is that this skill is not one of the buffed ones, right? So that means that you can already get 30% to one ally while also giving them a pretty chunky 40% attack buff. And that's all live right now if you summon for Reines. It's the third skill that gets buffed, which is already pretty decent as is, because it basically gives you 2 hits of invincibility for 3 turns, which is really strong survivability. And then it gives them 30% debuff resistance for 3 turns, which not the craziest, but when you consider that a lot of servants have an innate debuff resistance value of like maybe 14, 15%, maybe even up to 20% depending on magic resistance or goddess essence or goddess core, stuff like that, it can actually be really good when combined with those other passive skills. It's the upgrade that makes the skill really crazy, because then they add on an additional 20% battery. So with all 3 of these skills, she can give somebody a 50% battery, which again is super invaluable in a support type servant. But then again, let's not undervalue the fact that she's providing a lot of defensive support to the party and that one member, because not only is she giving them solid defense, solid damage cut, she's also making it pretty hard to put debuffs on them by combining that 30% with any passive debuff resistance that they already have, and then also making them basically immune to damage for 2 attacks while also gassing up their attack. Like, this isn't something to say that she's bad, but she has very just good generic things that she gives to people, which is kind of what you know Waver and Reines for. Like, they just both give very generic good buffs to the party, and that's why they're so insane and just splashable in any team. Even specifically in Reines' case, anybody would love to have more defensive utility, anybody would love to have 2 free hits of invincibility, plus extra debuff immunity, and a 50% battery, and a big just chunky 40% attack buff, which means she's compatible with any type of servant, whether they be single target, AoE, art, quick, buster, doesn't really matter, because they can all use these buffs. I will say it's a little unfortunate that unlike Waver, she doesn't give any crit buff, but I'm assuming that's kind of just to distinguish them from one another. Reines gives far more defensive power, whereas Waver's a bit more offensively driven. Even when we start looking at their NPs, Reines does give you a little bit of offensive power with this NP by reducing all enemies' defense by 30 to 50% depending on her NP level, which is really good, by the way. It actually gives you somewhat of an incentive to get higher NP copies because it does give you more damage to the entire enemy party for 3 turns, so that's at least not a useless dupe. It's not the most useful thing in the world because it's not damaging, but even that first jump from 30 to 40% is pretty useful if you manage to snag a second copy of Reines. But then everything else that she's doing is just very defensive. Like, first of all, she cleanses all of your debuffs, which I think is crazy to have on any server. And an AoE party-wide debuff cleanse is just very, very valuable to have, especially considering how much bosses debuff nowadays and how they just continually stack them on. So having a very solid defensive support that can also yeet off the debuffs is very strong. Her overcharge is reducing their chance to do a critical attack by 20 to 60%, which again is one of those effects that you don't really want to have, but like it's kind of necessary to have, if that makes sense. It's not the skill you want, but it's the skill you need, because anything past like Lost Belt 1 is critting you like absolute maniacs. So being able to even put a dent in their chance to crit you just keeps you alive for longer. But then it's that grants party ignored defensive class disadvantage for 3 turns. That I think is absolutely crazy, because I did some testing around with it, and it allows you to make your berserkers take type neutral, which is like the main detriment of using berserkers, is that they blow up. So not only can Reines make them really tanky, she takes off the main debuff of using a berserker. It also protects Reines if you're bringing her to an assassin boss, because it removes her own class disadvantage of being a rider fighting an assassin. Now, this doesn't give you super effective damage or even neutral damage against them, because again, like I've been saying, Reines is strictly pretty much a defensive support type servant. She has a little bit of things here and there, like the defense down and the attack buff to 1 ally, that do help her bring a little bit of the team's offense out, but she's predominantly just there to make you really tanky and very hard to take out. Plus, I think it would be really broken if she ignored defense class disadvantage and then gave the entire party class advantage against whoever they were fighting. That would be a little broken. Although, I do believe we could potentially see that in the future if she gets buffed again. If they want to make Reines just really crazy relevant, they would probably do something like that. Because, let's be honest, like, 80% of the player base would still just use, like, double Scotty, double Merlin, double Koyenskaya, double Castoria. They would just double up on those, but it would still make her a very interesting option for a lot of challenge quests for us big brain FGO5 heads over here. But Reines is definitely very good. The kind of end conclusion of should you summon for her or not really depends on how your box is looking. Like, I'm definitely going to say if you have double Scotty, you really don't need to summon for Reines. She's very good to have in your box. She's a very valuable asset and will be even better when she gets her buff earlier next year. But if you're not going to summon for her now, I don't advise for you to summon for her when she gets her buff, because Castoria will be right around the corner. And again, I'm going to tell you to summon for Castoria every day of the week over Reines. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. That's kind of my 2 cents on kind of the issue right now, the little predicament we have with Reines right now. But with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace, late guys.